All right, today we are tackling a really big question in AI. How can all these different artificial intelligences, each with its own way of seeing the world, actually agree on a single shared reality? It sounds like science fiction, but it's a very real problem. So let's dive in.
So this is the core of it, right? We're building these incredibly powerful specialized AIs, but the problem is they often have these subjective or maybe incomplete views of the exact same thing. One AI might see the entire forest, while another is laser-focused on just the individual trees. How in the world do you get them on the same page?
Okay, to really get a handle on this, let's use an analogy that we're going to stick with. Imagine you have several different teams of neuroscientists, all studying the human brain. Now, each team has created its own unique map, its own atlas of the brain's regions. Some of these maps are crazy detailed, while others are more of a high-level overview. They're all describing the same brain, but from totally different perspectives. So the big question is, how can they ever combine their findings?
And this brings us right to our first major point, the urgent need for AIs to collaborate and, well, the pretty fundamental challenges that are standing in the way.
So just like our neuroscientists, every AI develops its own subjective model of the world. And these models can vary wildly in their level of detail, or what researchers call granularity. So the real challenge here is translation. I mean, how can one AI possibly understand what another one knows if they're basically speaking different conceptual languages? The ultimate goal then is to build a system where a single shared understanding can actually emerge from all these different individual AIs.
So, how do we even begin to solve this puzzle? Well, first, we need to understand how an individual AI builds its own map of the world. And it really all comes down to mapping cause and effect.
The main tool for this is something called a structural causal model, or SCM for short. Just think of it as an AI's personal brain atlas. What's so important here is that it's a map that doesn't just show correlations, that two things happen at the same time. No, it describes how one thing explicitly causes a change in another through a very specific mechanism.
So, a really simple SCM breaks it down just like this. First, you've got a cause. The sprinklers are turned on. Then, there's a mechanism, which is just the rule that water makes the ground wet. And finally, you get the effect. The grass is now wet. It's a super clear, direct chain of causality that the AI can use to understand its world and make predictions.
Okay, so if every AI has its own unique causal map, how do we connect them? This is where a really crucial idea comes into play: abstraction. And you can really think of it as the art of translation. Let's jump back to our neuroscientists for a second. Imagine one has this incredibly detailed atlas with 100 specific brain regions. That's our low-level model. But another scientist has a much simpler big-picture atlas with just 10 broad regions. That's the high-level model. Now, for them to collaborate, they have to find a way to map those 100 detailed regions onto the 10 broader ones. This is the exact challenge, translating between different levels of detail.
In the world of AI, this translation is formalized as a causal abstraction, or CA. And as you can see, it's basically a mathematical translation key. It lets you map a complex model onto a simpler one. But here's the magic part. It does this while perfectly preserving the essential cause and effect relationships. It's the formal rulebook our scientists can use to make their detailed findings make sense to each other.
Of course, you can't just use any old translation. You need rules to make sure it's a good translation. And that's where something called the Semantic Embedding Principle, or SEP, comes in. Think of it as a mathematical guarantee. It makes sure that when you translate information between models, it all flows consistently, and most importantly, without creating any contradictions. It keeps everything honest.
Okay, so we've got individual AIs with their causal maps, and we've got the translation keys to connect them. Now let's see how this all gets built into one powerful network. And this right here is the central idea of the research we're looking at, the Causal Abstraction Network, or CAN. A CAN is the big, overarching structure that takes all of those individual subjective models and links them all together using those consistent translations we talked about. What you get is a single, unified web of causal knowledge.
Let's go back to our analogy one last time. The CAN is the entire collaborative system. It's not just the individual maps or the translation keys. It's the whole framework that connects all the different labs, making sure their research can be woven together into one cohesive, shared understanding of the brain.
This quote from the source paper really just nails the outcome. It says, "Global causal knowledge emerges inductively from the interaction of causal AI agents. And that word, inductively, is so important. It means this shared reality isn't dictated from the top down. Nope, it's built from the bottom up. It emerges naturally as all the individual AIs collaborate and share what they know.
Now, this all sounds fantastic in theory, right? But how do you actually build one of these networks? I mean, how does this system automatically learn all these intricate connections?
Well, until pretty recently, this was a massive roadblock. Actually, learning a CAN was a total computational nightmare. It was slow, super expensive, and really, really complex. It was the major barrier that was preventing this powerful idea from ever being used in practice.
But then, the researchers behind this work came up with a new solution called Spectral. It's an incredibly efficient and robust algorithm that finally makes learning these networks practical. Instead of getting bogged down in all those messy calculations, it finds the right connections much more directly and reliably. It basically untangles the whole mess.
And the results, well, they really speak for themselves. In their experiments, Spectral was able to recover the correct network structure with near-perfect accuracy, a 0.99 F1 score, which is just fantastic. This proves that learning these complex, unified models of reality isn't just a theoretical pipe dream anymore.
So, with a practical way to actually build these networks, what does this all mean for the future of AI? Let's zoom back out. The Causal Abstraction Network has some huge implications. First, it massively improves explainability because we can finally see how all these different AI models actually relate to each other. It also builds trustworthiness, since the network's built-in consistency checks make sure the collective knowledge is sound. Then there's robustness, because you get a much more complete picture of reality than any single AI could ever manage on its own. And finally, and maybe most importantly, it enables true collaboration, laying down a formal foundation for teams of AIs to actually work together. The really crucial point to take away is this. The CAN framework is a huge paradigm shift. It allows us to move away from developing these isolated AI geniuses, each one locked away in its own little world, and move toward a future of collaborative AI that can harness the wisdom of the crowd.
And that leaves us with one last thought to chew on. From accelerating scientific discovery to solving incredibly complex global problems, just imagine, what could we achieve if our AIs weren't just brilliant individuals, but could truly collaborate to build a shared, emergent wisdom?